Can you guys hear me? All good? Cool, yeah. We'll talk a little bit about Aethir and the infrastructure we're building, touch on some of the gaming side, touch on some of the AI side, but hopefully you find it interesting. So we'll start with just a little bit about myself. My name's Mark. I'm one of the co-founders here at Aethir. My background's in infrastructure building, started in kind of oil and gas, building large infrastructure projects in pretty remote places, spent a number of years in the middle of the desert, a couple of years in the middle of the ocean, all good fun. Did that for the first 6 years of my career before getting the entrepreneurial itch and founding my first company. It was a biotech company. Actually moved to China to get closer to manufacturing and reduce the iteration cycle on these sensors, and that was a pretty meaningful step. Worked on that for another couple of years, raised some money, and started to feel a pull back into infrastructure, and there was some really cool infrastructure projects happening in China at the time. In particular, some really cool stuff in the cloud, in the GPU cloud, particularly as that relates to kind of mobile cloud gaming, PC cloud gaming, which was pretty cool and pretty relevant to where kind of Aethir started and where we are today. So what does Aethir do today? We address this problem, right? You've probably heard it any number of times, right? There's this global compute scarcity out there. You've heard maybe Elon Musk come out and say things like GPUs are harder to buy than drugs. You've probably seen Zuckerberg out there purchasing around $11 billion worth of H100 GPU infrastructure, GPUs at a time. And this is putting a huge amount of pressure on the market. Effectively, it's becoming increasingly more difficult for startups and small to medium-sized businesses and enterprises to access these critical GPU resources that they need to build in the AI economy and particularly in the gaming economy as well. So at Aethir, we took a look at this problem and kind of broke it down into four real pieces, right? Not every one of these Aethir can address itself, but there is a piece that we do address. The first, of course, is buy pressure, right? There's essentially an insatiable amount of demand for compute from the biggest tech companies in the world, right? Amazon, Google, OpenAI, they essentially have an unlimited amount of appetite for compute, and that's putting a huge amount of pressure on traditional supply channels like the hyperscalers. Flip side of that coin, of course, is the supply side, right? NVIDIA can only produce so many chips a year, despite being arguably the biggest or second biggest company in the world. There's only a certain amount of chips that come out. And right now, there is just this gap between the number of chips that we need and essentially the compute demand out there. That compute demand is largely being driven by this increase in LLM complexity, right? Later generation models are just turning out to be exponentially more expensive to train from a compute and a data perspective than their predecessors. However, within that same time frame, we're not seeing an exponential increase in either the amount of compute that's onboarding into the market or an improvement in chipset technology that's bridging that gap. So we seem to be seeing this kind of widening gap between the requirements for compute and the amount of compute that's onboarding into the market. But where Aethir kind of focuses is this inefficiency side. So actually we did quite a bit of research and took a look at the utilization of enterprise-grade GPU infrastructure across the US, for example, and it's actually incredibly poorly managed. Often we're seeing GPU infrastructure that's sitting underutilized almost 80% of the time. So we realized if we could create this infrastructure layer that allowed us to really easily surface and aggregate that kind of distributed and underutilized compute, that was meaningful supply that we could then redistribute to the compute marketplace. So that's essentially what we built, right? Aethir built a decentralized enterprise-grade GPU infrastructure for AI and gaming companies. Essentially, we aggregate compute, GPU compute from tech companies, enterprises, data centers, and even crypto mining organizations that have latent kind of GPU compute. And we surface that and make it easier to access from the kind of global compute demand side. This is roughly what it looks like just from a systems diagram perspective. And if you were to go to the Aethir website, this is kind of the platform that you'd see. Anyone that's purchased compute before, this would be very, very familiar. For those of you who haven't, think of it just like a menu at a restaurant, right? You go in, you pick the type of thing you want, right? What GPU, how many, where, and instead of using your credit card at Aethir, you'll use the ATH token to purchase that compute. On the flip side, if you're allocating compute to the network, it's equally simple, right? It takes about 15 minutes in an API call to get the network to recognize your compute. And then all you need to do is stake a couple of ATH tokens to make your compute live within our network. And that's about a 10 to 15 minute process. So pretty simple. So what makes Aethir different? I think we're at DePIN Day. There's a number of DePINs in the compute space. At Aethir, we focus on enterprise compute, right? I think a lot of DePIN projects, particularly in the compute space, have a tendency to aggregate consumer GPUs. This is a great way to build your network quite quickly. It's a great way to onboard a large number of users because people are pretty committed to your token doing well if they know that they're going to receive rewards as a result of that through their contribution of their compute. The challenge here is it becomes really difficult at later stages to sell that compute to enterprise customers, right? It's really hard to convince enterprise buyers that that GPU that's owned by, Jimmy the gamer isn't just going to be kind of switched off at night, right? Or the bandwidth that's delivering that compute to your network in that household isn't going to be throttled because they have like a Netflix session every 9 p.m., right? So it's really hard to package and sell and meet the kind of SLAs, the kind of performance, quality, and uptime requirements of big customers when you've aggregated consumer GPUs. So at Aethir, we focus 100% on enterprise compute, right? So we have around 43,000 GPUs within our network. Every single one of them is enterprise grade, sitting in a data center or contributed through enterprise grade network infrastructure. So essentially we have an entire compute infrastructure network that is 100% synergist with enterprise compute demands. So we have any number of enterprise compute customers on the gaming and the AI side, and we can serve them because every single one of our GPUs is capable of meeting all of their performance, quality, and uptime requirements. So what are the compute products that we do have? On the top here, you'll see our two AI products. We have AI inferencing solutions and AI training solutions. This is built on the back of the biggest kind of H100 or high-performance compute infrastructure stack in Web3. We have around 3,000 H100s today. We essentially have more that would like to come in, but we have to be pretty careful of not onboarding too much supply into our network too early. We like to keep supply ahead of demand, but we like to keep demand kind of in touch with supply. Some of the biggest large language model training contracts on a DePIN are happening within our AI training stack. Some really, really cool AI applications on our inferencing stack as well. On the bottom side here, you'll see our origin story, the gaming compute. On the left there, our gaming industry compute is where we have our mobile cloud gaming, our PC cloud gaming, our cloud publishing solutions. And then the virtualized compute is kind of like a corporate version of that, essentially some really cool VM software and infrastructure that is essentially built on the same compute as the gaming stack. So a bit of gaming flavor here. I have to do this talk again on the gaming stage later today. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about the original problem that Aethir started to solve prior to our kind of evolution into the AI company we are today. If you look at the 3.3 billion gamers that are out there, right? 1 in 2 people out there is essentially a gamer, but 2.8 billion of them are gaming on low-end devices, right? That means that much of, if not the most of the content that you or I kind of would consider mainstream is inaccessible to them as a result of their devices, right? Some of the biggest and coolest and most exciting games, they can't access them. But the flip side of that is that those big gaming studios also can't access those users. That hardware is kind of a two-way barrier that's incredibly persistent, right? And if there was an opportunity to kind of remove that barrier, that would be a massive, massive increase to the gaming market and a massive piece of the pie that I'm sure everyone would love to unlock. We thought about this problem quite deeply, and really there's only kind of 3 ways that I can imagine it being solved, right? The first is you take the regions where people live that have these low-end devices and you raise the GDP. Essentially, you make them more wealthy and all of a sudden they can buy these fancy phones or fancy gaming PCs or consoles. That's probably not very likely in the short term. Maybe with AGI and UBI we'll get there, but in the short term it's not very likely. Second option, of course, is some quantum leap in GPU or CPU technology where all of a sudden we can produce really high-powered chips at very, very low prices, and we can distribute it and essentially democratize access to powerful compute in pretty much any device that a user has. Again, probably unlikely. Human nature, capitalist nature, we'd probably screw that up anyway. So also not probably going to happen. But the third option here, I think, is super achievable, and that is take a technology we already have, right, which is cloud gaming, where we abstract away the hardware requirement for a user. We do the hardware, we do the processing in the cloud, and instead of requiring them to own all that hardware themselves, we have that hardware for them, and then we just figure out how to scale it, we already have the technology. Now we just need to learn how to scale it more effectively, scale it into the regions where these people live, scale it into the places that Google Stadia and GeForce Now have kind of been unable to touch as a result of the high cost of kind of centralized infrastructure in this field. And that's exactly what Aethir does, right? So we have cloud gaming infrastructure that's scaling across Southeast Asia, across Latin America, scaling into Africa and India. Of course, our infrastructure is also through the US and Europe. But what's really cool is that we can take this technology that already exists, that abstracts away that hardware requirement for users, and scale it into the regions where this technology will have the most impact. So super cool stuff. Some recent highlights about Aethir. As was just mentioned, our token went live middle of last month. Just prior to that, we did a kind of the biggest node sale in history, raised around 42,000 ETH, sold just under 72,000 nodes. Our community is now well over 1 million strong. We have some of the biggest kind of AI and gaming customers in the world building across our infrastructure with 150 employees distributed all over. Some great partnerships with amazing companies like NVIDIA, and like I mentioned, around 42,000 enterprise-grade GPUs distributed across 24 different countries. Something that I really wanted to quickly touch on, which is kind of a new piece of the overall Aethir infrastructure stack, is this device here. It's called the Aethir Edge. Something interesting about the Edge. Who knows broadly what edge computing is as kind of a term? Okay, cool. Essentially, it's pushing compute as close to the user as you can, right? You want, in some instances, that compute to happen really close to a user because maybe the time or the latency is a sensitivity that you want to try and remove from your ecosystem. I think it's going to be an increasingly important piece, particularly of the AI ecosystem moving forward as kind of smaller models are pushed out to consumer devices and we start to have a far greater interaction with those models as independents and consumers. So this device here is a partnership between Aethir and Qualcomm. It has their latest AI chip inside. You get this device, you plug it in at home. It connects to your Wi-Fi, and it operates as an enterprise-grade compute node within Aethir's ecosystem, right? It's able to conduct really incredible AI inferencing tasks for AI applications and AI agents. We're working with a number of really cool companies to support their agentic infrastructure on this network. It also does kind of real-time rendering tasks for our mobile cloud. So it does a whole bunch of stuff, and it's incredibly cool. Roughly 23% of Aethir's reward infrastructure, or 23% of our total token supply, is allocated to this infrastructure, and it's going to really change the way we address the edge, change the way that we address kind of consumer-grade compute. So we're very excited to kind of deploy this. Right now, we've had about 8,000 of these units sold in very early kind of pre-sales, but we expect hundreds of thousands of these devices to be out within the next kind of 6 months. So definitely stay tuned. But that is, I think, all from me. Thank you very much for your time.